everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by BedandBreakfast.com. The webinar is Increasing Telephone Reservations. My name is Tim Wilson, and I manage the BedandBreakfast.com Diamond Collection program for our company. I've been with BedandBreakfast.com for close to 14 years now, and I've pretty much worked in every aspect of our business. I've met many of you, I'm sure, at the various PI conferences. And so again, thanks for attending our webinar. We'll be talking about ways in which you can increase your telephone reservations. And part of the reason why we are hosting the webinar is that through our Diamond Collection program, which is an inspection-based program, the aspects of the inspection involves a couple of mystery shopper phone calls to properties by our inspectors, just to see how they handle over-the-phone reservations and are they, recognizing all the various opportunities that might be presented by a typical caller. And through that inspection process, we do find that a lot of properties are missing out on some of the opportunities that a typical caller might present when calling and inquiring about a reservation at your property. So I thought it might be a good idea to host a webinar based on that topic, just see if we might be able to help you out in terms of converting more of those callers into reservations. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started here. You did have a little chat window that is in the interface there for GoToMeeting. And if you had some questions or if there's something I can try and address for you while you're on the conference, please type that into the chat and I'll do my best to try to respond. The other side of it too is if you did have some questions for me after the conference or the webinar, please feel free to give me a call or an email, and I'm very happy to help too. My email address is bwilson, W-L-S-O-N, at bedandbreakfast.com. My phone number is 512-3212. So let's go ahead here. We'll address a number of different topics. We'll talk about how travelers book their stays. We'll talk about some basic phone etiquette. We'll talk about whether or not calls should go to voicemail, and if they do go to voicemail, how that can be handled. And then we'll kind of summarize everything, and then there will be some time for some questions too. So, based on our traveler surveys, actually want to speak with you before booking their reservations. About half of guests, or 34, want to talk to you before booking reservations. These quotes here are just some of the comments that we get in our surveys from travelers who love staying at B&Bs and just in terms of how they research properties and how they book. So I think some of these comments here are pretty interesting for me. The last one I think is most interesting. I read about the B&Bs, choose several, then call the innkeepers. Their friendliness, response time, and attitude is key, and I think that's a big one. I like to say, having worked at BedandBreakfast.com for 14 years like I have, and being in our sales division and talking with innkeepers for years and years and years, going to all the conferences, I like to claim, and I can't substantiate it, but I do like to claim that I've spoken with more innkeepers than anybody else in this world, working for the largest online directory for B&Bs and Inns. And I can tell you that in my calls to properties, there are plenty of times where I call a property and the person answers the phone, hello? Or, just not a very professional answer. Other properties certainly answer, do drop in, this is Tim, how can I help you? Things like that. And so I always find it pretty telling one property, and then granted, our company name show up on the caller ID, and so they may answer the call differently when I call versus maybe when a prospective guest calls. That's absolutely a possibility. But we always find it interesting when a property who's in business and taking reservations, looking for reservations, answers the phone by simply saying hello or hi, this is Tim, because it doesn't really let the caller know that they're actually speaking with the bed and breakfast that they intended to call. So that's kind of an obvious one. Breakfast is a much more intimate experience than a typical big box hotel, which means that guests will expect a more hands-on experience from their initial contact with you until after they check out. But we folks 34 years of older prefer to have at least one calling keeper, even if they've already researched your inn online. The point is if you want to fill your vacancies, you have to be able to be good on the phone. Your paycheck is calling. You guys are in business and looking for reservations, and your reservations is where you guys generate your revenue. And so I think the phone answering aspect of your business is critical for you to be successful. There are plenty of times where again, and I'm different from a traveler calling. I'm calling from BedandBreakfast.com, so it's probably most of the time going to be a different type of situation for the keeper. But plenty of times when I call folks, they're maybe doing the dishes and you can hear the clanking around in the background, or they're in a busier area where there's a lot of commotion, and that's totally fine for me. But when it comes to a guest, I think it's probably a turnoff to a guest if you're talking with them while you're doing your dishes, or perhaps there's a lot of commotion in the background. It might be a distraction to the guest. So the suggestion is just to drop everything. Try not to multitask when you're on the phone with a prospective guest. Take notes so you can stay focused on them and what they're looking for. When you're acted and when you're doing other things, when you're talking with that guest about reservation, maybe you're folding towels or still in the kitchen baking cookies or something like that, you have to convey to the guest that your attention is focused on them, and I think that's going to help that guest feel more confident about booking a stay with you. Okay, and limit the necessary sounds that might be going on in the background. If you can, take the call in a private, quiet room where you can focus on that caller, because again, it's your paycheck that's calling. So 4 rings max. These days with cell phones typically programmed to go to voicemail after 4 rings, if someone is calling your property and your phone is ringing more than 4 times, they may wonder what's going on and whether they'll have an opportunity to leave a voicemail or not. So if you can, try and answer the call within the first 4 rings. 2's preferable. And if not, make sure that your voicemail is set up to pick up after 4 rings. Use seconds to establish a positive rapport with your guests. When you're on the phone, they can hear that you're smiling. Be positive, be sort of outgoing, and sound like you're happy to be talking with them and happy to hopefully host them as your guest. All of that stuff is going to make a big difference. Then also here, wanted to make sure one more thing. So, if you do have to, put your guest on hold, just ask for the permission to put them on hold there. Give them an estimate time of when you'll return, and then, most, I think importantly, before you end the call, is just make sure you ask them if you've answered all of their questions. And we'll get to this a little bit later, but also, make sure that you're asking for the business before the call ends as well. The 3 rules of phone selling. Okay, number 1, pretend that you're having a face-to-face conversation. As I mentioned, smile when you talk. People can hear it in your voice. If you're enthused and energetic and sounding like you love what you're doing, that's going to be conveyed in your tone when you're talking with prospective guests, and I think that'll help them feel more confident about booking a stay with you. Great suggestion, I think, is to create a question checklist that you can use on each call, whether it be for you or your staff, in particular for your staff, I would say. But a checklist is a nice way to make that you're not forgetting, to ask all all the right questions and all the questions that you know give you the highest propensity for securing the reservation. Over time and your experience in doing all this, I'm sure you figured out, what works well, what doesn't work well, what people respond to, what they are turned off by, and things like that. And so I think it's a great idea to kind of have a note or checklist of those sort of topics of discussion that you want to make sure that you're covering when you're talking with a prospective guest, and that way, you're not leaving anything out, and you know that, all right, if I do all these things on this checklist, I'm giving myself the best opportunity to try to capture this reservation. I think it's important too to use the caller's name. So when you're talking to the guest, make sure you get their name. Make sure you give them your name as well, and use their name while you're talking with them throughout the conversation too. If you have to, write their name down. A lot of people are bad with names, and you might get their name, but a couple seconds later it might be gone from your mind. So if you have to, and you're bad with names, write their name down and make sure that you're able to use their name in the call. You don't want to be caught where you've forgotten their name and you get to an awkward moment in the conversation where they might expect you to use their name and you're not remembering what their name is. So I think it's a good idea to write their name down, especially if you're bad with names, to try to remember that and reference that throughout the call. Forget, your goal here is to reserve the room. So while it might be great to talk about your grandkids might be the same age, or talk about some other personal interests, that type of thing, your goal in this call is to secure the reservation. You're getting a lot of time to chat with your guests when they stay with you, so you'll be able to talk some more about some of those topics you might touch on in that initial phone inquiry call. But don't spend too much time chit-chatting. You want to build the rapport, absolutely, and start building that relationship, but try not to get too deep into that where you forget the fact that, hey, I'm still trying to secure this reservation. All right. So the introduction. Answer every call with a smile. Again, that comes across to folks calling you. If you call and you're mopey sounding and BedandBreakfast.com, this is Tim. People are going to say, "Gosh, what's the matter with this guy?" But if you're answering the phone and you say, BedandBreakfast.com, this is Tim. How can I help you? You're going to sound. They're going to feel like, "Gosh, this guy's really loving what he's doing. He's engaged. He's interested in talking with me." And so you can smile in your voice when you're talking. So when you start your introduction, again, make sure you let them know who they are talking to. Give them your IN's name, just so they know. All right, yeah, I've called the right place. Maybe you have a little one-liner, target or something like that. Thanks for calling the Dewdrop Inn, located in central downtown Austin in the historic district, or something like that. Just to kind of let them know, your marketing message there. You can squeeze that in and let them know that they're talking to the property that they intended to call, and then just make sure you get the caller's name, and then use their name throughout the call. You want a relationship too. So ask the what's in it for the customer focus type questions to try and qualify the customer and develop that relationship. And some questions you might think about asking are, what brings you to our area? So you can get an idea as to, why they're coming to stay with you. Maybe it's a family reunion. Maybe they're traveling on business. Maybe they're there for a funeral. Who knows? But what brings you to our area? And that'll help you, more information and better tailor your conversation to that guest. Will you come alone or with a partner? How soon do you need to make your travel arrangements? That'll give you an idea as to, are they book here today, or are they just kind of feeling around, looking around, seeing what they want to do? All these things will help you better tailor your conversation to that caller to give you a better chance of securing that reservation. Do you have needs, interests, or expectations? A lot of this stuff can be, helpful because it can address, maybe things that, maybe folks are thinking that you offer one thing, but you offer a different thing, or maybe folks are expecting, type of service or this level of service when you offer this other level of service. And so, you can address those needs and interests and set the proper expectations. And more than anything, just better understand what it is that your customer, your prospective customer, wants out of a stay at your property. Ask these open-ended questions and don't interrupt. Let them say what they want to say. Let them answer your question, and respectful of them, wanting to kind of explain to you what it is that they're looking for. You're talking with folks, I think it makes perfect to make recommendations on, you might like this room, or upsell options. Maybe you have some massage or spa options there at the property, or maybe you have a package where you can have some roses and a bottle of champagne or wine waiting in the room or something like that. But be sure that you can squeeze those things in the call as well. Maybe it's a husband who's planning an anniversary surprise getaway for his wife, and maybe to many guys could use a little extra help or guidance on how to create that perfect experience. And so helping when you find out the reason for travel, what they're looking for, that type of thing, again, all of that just helps you better tailor your offering to the traveler, so that you can give yourself the highest chance of securing that booking. So more establishing a relationship. This is a big one, and I'm sure a lot of you probably do this. But you're going to find a much different traveler if they're a business traveler versus a leisure traveler. Business traveler, be so interested in your 3-course breakfast that you might make from scratch each morning. Maybe they need to get out the door earlier in the morning, and for those folks, maybe you offer a breakfast sandwich to go as they're walking out the door, and a cup of coffee to go. I think a lot of business travelers might appreciate that type of thing. Maybe needing to get out the door early for a meeting or something like that. And a leisure traveler is probably looking for a totally different experience. Your 3 or 4-course breakfast may be one of the biggest reasons they booked your property. So make sure you understand if it's a leisure traveler or business traveler. Midweek versus weekend. We'll give you some indication on that too. Understand their budget and what kind of bedding are they looking for, and all of that stuff is just going to again help you better tailor your conversation to the guest. All right, this next one here is a big one for me. Make sure you're selling the experience. A lot of B&Bs are the destination. There may be a lot of folks, you guys may be off the beaten path. Maybe you're not in a big, huge, traveler destination, but your property may very well be the destination. And so folks might be coming to your area just for a getaway at your property. And so you're gonna be able to help them, understand what options there are available in your area. You're going to be their concierge and pointing them in the right direction. And so, make sure you're selling the experience. I know that a lot of properties, just kind of, they may not do as great of a job selling the experience that they offer at the property. And so many of you offer such great experiences, and that's a lot of what, in particular, the leisure travelers are looking for. So if the caller is maybe, looking to plan a girlfriend's getaway or something like that, you can say, you guys are going to love, lounging around the front porch on the rockers, and then when you get ready, Town Square is within walking distance, where there's a lot of great shops and wine bars and things that are just to die for. So you can kind of tailor that conversation that way. If it's someone else who's looking for something else, tailor it a different way. But build that good rapport with the guest. Use the information that you've gathered about the caller to make the proper recommendations. To help them, get the experience that they're looking for. And thing too is just in selling the value that you offer. So not only are you selling the experience, but you also offer a ton of value. There's a lot of travelers out there who've never stayed at a B&B before. A few years ago, and I don't know if it's still accurate, but a few years ago, Pi used to say that something like 4% of travelers have ever experienced a B&B. So a full 96% of folks have never experienced a B&B. And again, I don't know if that stat is still accurate or not, but I know that was something that was said a few years ago. And really, it's just to say that that's the case, 96% of folks out there may not know what it's like to stay at a B&B. So, you have to kind of understand that when you're talking with your prospective guests, so that you can, fully tailor the conversation to them, and help them better understand some of the value that you offer. Things like, oh yeah, you're not going to have to pay for Wi-Fi here. We've got free parking, and there's a butler's pantry where you can help yourself to afternoon snacks and refreshments, and all of these things are part of your stay. Unlike staying at a hotel where there's a bottle of water for $5 and a little bag of gold for $4 and things like that, where you're paying $12 a day for Wi-Fi and all of it that ends up adding up. A couple of years ago, I was running our online reservations program at BedandBreakfast.com, and through that program, we work with Expedia and Hotels.com. They're the largest seller of online travel in the world. They've got call centers all over the world. Well, one of the things we did was to go to their call centers, where when folks on Expedia and maybe wanting to book a reservation but wanting to talk with somebody to book their reservation, they've got these call centers that can field those calls and help a person book. Well, we went to these call centers, one in McAllen, Texas, and one in Tacoma, Washington, and we trained all of their call center agents on how to best sell a traveler on staying at a B&B. And at the start of each of these transitions with the hundreds of call center agents that we worked with, we would ask them, what is it about a bed and breakfast that keeps you from suggesting a bed and breakfast to a traveler? And almost universally, the call center agents would say, well, B&B is too expensive. Say, gosh, a hotel is $100 a night, and this B&B is $130 a night, and so it's more expensive. And I would go on to explain to them, well, you have to remember, when you're staying at a B&B, you're getting included in the rate. At a hotel, that might cost you $20, depending on the hotel and the location and everything else. You add in the tip, and you could be above $20. And well, most B&Bs offer free Wi-Fi for their guests. At the hotel, you're probably paying $10, $12 a day for Wi-Fi. To be for free parking, you might park at the hotel. You're probably tipping the concierge and the bellman at the hotel, whereas you might not need to do that at a B&B, and you probably don't need to do it. In fact, the innkeeper's probably going to refuse that if you try to do that at a B&B. And so once we kind of ran through the whole gamut of all the things that are included at a B&B but not included when you're staying at a hotel, almost universally, again, these call center agents kind of had this aha moment and said, gosh, I never realized that. And so, there's a ton of value that B&Bs offer, and I think a lot of B&Bs may sell themselves a little bit short on that value, because you really do offer a ton of value. But, if, again, 96% of travelers have never experienced a B&B, there's a lot of folks calling you guys who may not understand all the value that you offer. So I think it's a good idea to convey that value as well. The little aspects, the little attributes of your property that are special to guests. Maybe it's the rocking chairs on the front porch, or the fireplace in each of the rooms, or you've got complimentary wine receptions, or heck, it could even be the nice breeze that comes through the front porch each morning. And things like that are things that help you kind of sell that experience. So, gathering the information. You're talking with guests. You've introduced yourself and you're in. You've established, what the guest is looking for their getaway, and you've gotten, the guest excited about the unique amenities that your inn offers. That'll make your property the perfect place for a stay. Well, now if you haven't already, you need to add the dates that they're looking to stay with you, so you can make sure that you have that availability. So let your guests know about any special events that might be going on at various times of the year, and how that can at times dictate varying prices and rates at your properties. It's also a good time to remind guests of all the fees that they won't be paying. Again, here at this property, your breakfast is included. We've got the butler's pantry. There's a complimentary bottle of water in every room upon arrival. Any of the stuff that you do there where you're adding the value and not nickel and diming the guest, who may historically be used to getting nickel and dimed when they stay at hotels. So finally, bring back any specials or packages that you may have mentioned earlier when you were selling the experience too. that you're covering all the rates and explaining how your rates can fluctuate various times of the year. Maybe it's going to be, if you're a property in New Orleans, for example, and someone's looking to book it during Mardi Gras, well, you might have a 4-night minimum stay or 5-night minimum stay or over Mardi Gras, and your rooms might be twice as expensive during Mardi Gras as they are other times of the year. But that's all supply and demand, and it makes sense to a lot of travelers. It's the thick of the summer down in New Orleans. You might accept 1-night stays, and your rooms might be half as much as what you typically charge during Mardi Gras. And so, helping the traveler to understand, why your pricing is the way it is and the way it fluctuates throughout the year can sometimes be helpful. You don't have to go into too much detail on that stuff, but again, it's all about tailoring the conversation to the person that you're talking with. And so if you think that that's something that might help them, feel more comfortable in understanding the value that you offer, then I think it's certainly worth mentioning. Part here is always be closing. ABC, as they say, always be closing. The final step of all of this is that you're wanting to get the sale. You're wanting to get the rent and secure that reservation before the caller gets off the phone. And for a lot of it's the hardest part, because it's basically where you're asking for money. And you don't have to specifically ask for money, but there are ways or questions you can ask to try to secure that reservation where you are asking for money effectively, but just not saying it that way. So remember that you've already sold the value on the guest, and you've helped them realize, that their inn is exactly where they want to be. But if you feel like it's a done deal and it should, this person should book their reservation with you guys based on everything you've already talked about in the flow of the conversation, you might say something like, all right, well, if everything sounds good to you, I would love to help you book your reservation for the dates we've talked about. If you have a credit card handy, I can reserve your room for you right over the phone. It's just a 25% deposit or whatever, your deposit policy is, or however you handle reservations. I think a great way of doing it, though, is, all right, well, if everything sounds good, I'd love to help you book your stay. So that might be a way to ask for the business, and make sure you're asking for the business, because if you're not, you're probably going to lose out on some of those guests who might have booked you who asked for the business. So definitely be asking for the business. And so when it comes to actually closing the sale, after you've asked for the payment, don't be afraid if your guests give an objection. An objection is typically just a request for more information from the guest. Maybe there's some aspect of the conversation where they didn't quite get all the information they were wanting there, and so that might be their reason for their objection. It doesn't mean they don't want to stay with you. They may just have some more questions. So don't be concerned or afraid if they do object when you initially ask for their business. But if the caller is objecting to price, maybe try selling more of the value. Assuming you're competitively priced for area, and the dates they've selected are available, and the amenities that you offer, try selling more of the value that you offer. Ask if you've answered all of their questions so they can make a decision, and information along via email so you can stay at the top of their mind if maybe they are still researching. That serves two purposes. One, their email address, so you can add them to your mailing list for future offers that you might be running, future availability you might have, and at the same time, it allows you to stay in contact with them directly after the call you just hung up from, where they're maybe still thinking about booking a stay with you. If your system allows, your property management software, let them know that you can hold the room for them for 24 hours with just their contact information. Again, this serves two purposes. It gives you contact information. It gives them the feeling that, okay, I'm holding this room at this property, but it gives you a way to be in future contact with that guest or prospective guest, because maybe they're not ready to book right then and there, but at least you've got their contact information for potential future bookings. Maybe if in your slow season and you do have a little wiggle room in your pricing, that you have a back pocket offer that you can kind of pull out last minute there if you feel it might help you secure that reservation. I'm not suggesting to discount your rooms, but there are a segment of travelers out there that are now, I think, somewhat trained to look for some kind of a discount with, all the, deal sites that are out there, the Groupon's, Living Social, offers, things like that. I do think that there is a growing maybe segment of travelers who are looking for some kind of deal. And, most folks don't want to discount their properties, but maybe, if you really think, all right, this back pocket offer could help me secure this reservation, maybe it's something that you pull out there, just on an as-needed basis if you really think it's going to help you, close the sale. Right. Yeah, I guess one of those back pocket offers might also be to, offer to take their reservation now, and by booking right now, you'll qualify for our free welcome gift, which is typically valued at $50. And that, might be just another kind of idea to help you secure that reservation right then and there. Maintaining the relationship. If you're unable to close the sale for whatever reason, maybe they're unavailable, or they're taking a family trip and you maybe can't accommodate children, or maybe they like to travel with their pet and you don't take pets, or anything else, make sure you get their email address nevertheless, so that you can contact them in the future. Make sure to send them your virtual brochure, or your latest e-newsletter. You can even send them a special offer for a future date. If you've gotten if you have a relationship, or if you know B&Bs in the area that might be a fit for the guest, if maybe you're not able to accommodate them for whatever reason, we always encourage folks to make a recommendation. That again, kind of serves two purposes. The traveler is going to appreciate the fact that you, who you've established a rapport with this guest, can recommend somebody else who might be a better fit for them. So they'll appreciate that, and they'll remember you for that. The other side of it is your local competition there, who you might be referring the guest to. They're going to appreciate that too, and probably reciprocate in the future. So maybe they're sold out and getting calls for reservations, and maybe you still have some availability. Well, the more you can kind of cooperate there with your local competition, I think is healthy, and I think it kind of helps the overall business there for everybody. So it's a nice gesture, and I think the travelers would appreciate it, and I think your local competition probably does too. So. It's kind of going to be an exercise just in what might happen if you are to secure the email address from every one of your prospective callers. So maybe a big part of all of this with phone reservations is trying to understand your phone conversion. By understanding your conversion, you can kind of get a better idea as to how you're doing and how you might be able to improve too. So this will kind of be a little exercise here that just goes to show you that by asking for their email address, even if you're not getting the reservation right then and there, potentially in the future you may still be able to secure reservations from them that can just add to your bottom line. So maintaining a database of guest email addresses from people who were unable to stay, you can hopefully get at least maybe 4 or 5% of them to reserve in the future. And while it may not seem like a huge amount, and perhaps maybe doesn't warrant the effort, I think we'll show you here in the next slide that just 5% more guests could be a big boost to your bottom line. Excuse me. Okay, so this, if you see the little web address here down at the bottom of this page, this is a link to a conversion calculator, and I'm sure there's a lot of different conversion calculators out there on the web, but this is just one that we found here that seems to make a lot of sense for our industry, and it's just something that can help you sort of understand better your conversion. So in this scenario, our conversion calculator shows that for an inn where the average stay is worth $500 and the inn books 1,000 reservations per year, if currently 27% of the people who call in make a reservation, by increasing that rate by just 5%, whether through emails or through future contact with your guests, you can actually make an extra $117,000 a year in revenue. And this is again just a kind of a general example here. You have to kind of plug in your own numbers to get the effect for your property. But just a 5% increase in that conversion can really make a pretty substantial difference in your overall annual revenue and things like that. So the link here down at the bottom, again, it's just to this calculator, and you can do this yourself to figure out your own conversion rate. One way to do it might be to get a little notepad or something like that and log calls for 2 weeks, and then tally the number of new reservations during that period, and then divide by the number of calls, or divide the number of calls by the number of reservations to kind of understand your conversion rate. Under normal circumstances, it should fall between the range of 25 to 30, maybe 35% if you're really great on the phone. So that this can kind of help you sort of understand where you fall against what would be expected. Right, so letting calls go to voicemail. This is, I think, a big one here too. So, again, I've talked to or called many properties where don't get an answer, but then the the voicemail ultimately picks up. And I think a lot of a traveler's perception, if they're not able to talk with you when they say that first time, may come to them by way of your voicemail. So, again, just like we suggest when you answer the phone, make sure you be very courteous and professional and crisp and clear in your voicemail message too. Periodically check your voicemail. Make sure it's working. I've called a number of properties where voicemail never picked up, and later ended up talking with the property and let them know, hey, I called you yesterday, but I never got your voicemail, and they said, oh gosh, really? And turns out maybe they had an issue with their voicemail. So always periodically check your voicemail and just make sure it's set up and working properly and as you would expect, and maybe a friend or two call your voicemail and see if they what they think of your voicemail. Is my voicemail welcoming? If you were a guest thinking about staying with me and you heard my voicemail, what would your impression be? Some of those opinions from folks that you trust can be helpful in helping you perhaps see past something that you might not be able to see yourself because it's your voicemail. So I think that's a good idea. No matter what, a real person is going to generate more reservations than a voicemail. So if you can, be sure and answer your phone. If you're too distracted, or you're one with a guest who's standing up there at your front desk, and you're unable to give the caller your devoted attention, I'd say it's probably better to let them to go to your voicemail. When a train and keep available to answer your phone, maybe up until 8 p.m. or something like that is going to help you, perhaps capture some more reservations too. Other side of all of this, obviously, too, is make sure in your voicemail that you can see all of our availability, our rooms, our descriptions, and actually book right online through our website at BedandBreakfast.com or whatever your website address is. That's another very, I think, effective thing to mention in your voicemail too. And I've called plenty of properties who do not mention that type of stuff in their voicemail. These are very easy to forward calls to a smartphone, and on that smartphone you may be using some software that allows you to see your availability in your property management software. So maybe you are out and about, yet still able to take a call and not be too distracted when you're taking the call. And so you can forward calls to your phone or to your cell phone rather than go into a voicemail, because again, a live person on the phone is going to help you generate more reservations than a voicemail. So if you are out and about, consider forwarding your phone if you think you might be able to actually answer calls. There's services out there that can answer the phone for you too. Services like Calling In. These folks are very, professional and highly trained in answering the call for properties in this industry. You can train them on what you want them to say and how they can sell your property. They can take messages for you, and rather than that person going to a voicemail, they can talk to a live person who gets you that message, and so you can call them back. So there's some options out there like that too. Okay, so letting calls go to voicemail. If you can't have an extended conversation with potential guests, don't be afraid to let it go to voicemail, rather than inconveniencing that guest who might be calling you, or the one who you may be talking with there face to face. Again, your voicemail should be warm and friendly, and hey, sorry I missed your call, but would love to talk with you, and make sure you give them all the information, your photos and reviews and book engine and everything else can all be seen on our website at this address. And if it's a complicated address, be sure to spell it out. Don't have travelers hunt around for your website if it's a little bit more of a complicated URL. don't be afraid to spell it out for them too, so that they know where they're going. And then this is a big one too, but especially with the phone call inquiries. But we say here to make sure you call back guests within 24 hours. I would say if you're able to, try to call them back within 2 or 3. The longer it goes between you calling the traveler back about that prospective reservation at your property, the more likely it's going to be for that person to start looking around elsewhere to, see what they can go ahead and get booked. Folks, it's kind of the same as, online real-time reservation versus reservation requests. A real-time reservation where the person's entering their credit card and for the reservation right then and there. It's going to give them that immediate gratification of knowing that they have a reservation at the property where they want to have their reservation. Whereas a reservation request is going to, cause that traveler to have to wait for you to get back to them to verify to them that you're going to take their reservation. And so that's why we've always said for years that, real-time reservations are going to be your better option versus a reservation request type of system. And I think that the same applies when it comes to calling folks back too. The longer you go before you call a traveler back to try to secure the reservation, the less likely it is that you'll be able to secure that reservation. And I would say even that the more likely it is that that person may have already moved on and begun the conversation with perhaps another property who was maybe more immediately available to them when they were calling trying to book their reservation. So if you can, try to call them back, and definitely do call them back at all times, and again, get their email address even if you're not able to take their reservation for future mailings and things like that if they're willing to give it to you. So cold calling, and no mistake here, this is not a suggestion to call guests from your list and say, hey, you want to come stay with me? I've got some openings. On cold calling, what we're kind of talking about here is that you reach out to, maybe you do have some slower times. Consider during those slower times to, reach out to local businesses, other local hotels, who may sell out pretty regularly. Maybe reach out to some of the nearby churches or schools, universities, funeral parlors, senior housing, country clubs, hospitals, you name it. All of these businesses to you guys can be great sources for reservations. So, on a slower day, if you don't have all the bookings you want, do something about it, and maybe try reaching out and networking with some of your local businesses there that may be very well qualified to send you guests, and it can all go to your greater good there. So when you call them, introduce them to your inn if they're not familiar with it. Add them to your mailing list so they can stay abreast of your specials and packages that you might be sending out via a newsletter or something like that. Offer to send them some of your brochures, or maybe even stop by with some muffins and say, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm down the street. We've got 6 great accommodations for travelers. Here's some muffins that we serve to our travelers that they love, and I thought you make some of these too. So hey, if you ever are talking with clients who need a place to stay, looking for lodging, just know we're right down the street, and we'd be more happy to house your guests for you. You look at getting some free help. You can, if you're in town with a university, you might think about reaching out to, some of the students in the marketing school or the business school who are studying marketing, and find some volunteers who might be willing to help you out on some of your marketing. Maybe writing some of your collateral for you, run analysis for you, things like that. A lot of universities love the local interaction there with local businesses, and I think you could find some students who may love to learn more about the hospitality industry, and at the same time, contribute to you some of their, helpful efforts as well. And just be sure that that they know that you're recommending, when you are reaching out to all these other local businesses, make sure that you're letting them know that you refer your guests to them too. So, maybe the great restaurants in your area, and you're very good about recommending your guests eat at such and such restaurant. Well, make sure that restaurant knows that. So, anytime an opportunity comes up there at the restaurant where a patron needs, or is looking for some lodging, or now or in the future, they'll be sure to recommend you guys too. And so it's all very reciprocal in this business. And make sure that you're letting folks know that you are recommending them as well. incentivizing your employees to get sales. Make a one-man show and it all yourself, but a little bit larger and have some staff who answers your phone too and takes reservations. And consider some different incentive plans to encourage that person taking the call to maybe try a little bit harder to get that reservation. And I think a big one too is that if you do have other folks taking reservations on your behalf, I think it's very, very important to make that occasional mystery shopper call to staff as well. And kind of if you can disguise your voice, or maybe have a friend do it so they wouldn't recognize the voice, but make some periodic calls to your property where you're kind of evaluating the folks you have answering the phone for your business to make sure that they're doing a good job for you when they're answering the phone. I think a lot of folks get hired and they kind of get busy doing all the day-to-day operations of running a B&B, which we all know there's a lot of that, and may just kind of assume, all right, yeah, my phones are being answered and they're probably a good job. But don't just assume. Make sure you're checking that periodically, because maybe if a person who answers the phone for you isn't securing as many reservations as you might like, or maybe they're securing fewer reservations than you would typically hear, well, there might be a reason for that. And so, doing some of these mystery shopper calls can help you figure that out. But kind of, back to the incentivizing, maybe you offer a commission if they answer phones, later in the day outside of their typical working hours. Maybe it's an on-site innkeeper who, prefers to kind of do things 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever, so 7 to 11 p.m. is, maybe more their personal time. Well, maybe offer them a little bit more of an incentive to take those reservations during what is typically their personal time. And that way, they're getting rewarded and not feeling like, gosh, here it's supposed to be my wind down time and I'm having to answer the phone. Well, give them a reason to do that. Monthly bonus for the staff member who does secure the most reservations. That might be a fun way for your staff to, really try to, strive to convert the callers into reservations. And, people like to be recognized. So, maybe you've got a staff member who's, really performing great for you, whereas others maybe aren't. Well, it's great to give those folks who are performing great that recommendation or that extra recognition, because they do appreciate it. Think about spiffs, extra spiffs, if they can secure a longer reservation. Maybe, the person's initially looking for one night, but you're able to get them to book 2 nights. And, well, hey, gosh, they're bringing you extra revenue because they got that second night stay out of the guest when initially they were just looking for one. So, maybe there's an incentive plan that can encourage the caller to try to book longer stays, or, things like that. Maybe you've got some add-on services like spa packages, or, tours, or, different things that you offer ancillary to just your rooms. And all of that stuff is stuff that brings you revenue. So, it makes sense to maybe incentivize additionally the person on the phone for securing some of those extras as well. So kind of in summary here, you always want to talk with your guests. Your guests may not always want to talk with you, and for that reason, hopefully you're all offering online reservations. But, it's for, again, and kind of coming back to the 96% of folks who've maybe never stayed at a B&B, but perhaps prefer hotels. Well, if you stayed at the Marriott or the Hilton or the Hyatt, wherever you've stayed at the Hilton or the Hyatt, well, you stayed in one, you've probably stayed in them all. And so you're not going to need to talk to the property as much to sort of, understand what the property's about, because you understand the brand, you've stayed in them before, and you pretty much are going to have the same expectation at any Hilton or Hyatt that you stay in. A bed and breakfast is totally different. There's not, as I know anyways, 2 B&Bs out there that are alike. Every single one of you guys are unique and individual in your own way. And so for that reason, there may be, more folks who want to call and perhaps book with you over the phone as just one added piece of reassurance that, they're booking their stay with you is a good idea. And so, again, when the call's in, begin your introduction with your inn's name, your location, and your little tagline. Make sure you get the person's name and use it when you are talking with them through the conversation. Write it down if you need to, if you're bad with names. Use that checklist as well. Have that, set aside on all your calls, and you can kind of go down the list and check them off as you ask all of those, pertinent questions that you know are going to help you better secure the reservation. Be friendly, smile on the phone. Be knowledgeable about your local events. You're the best concierge. You're the best person there that's going to help them understand what the options are when they're staying with you. It's about selling your two or your rooms. Breakfast is half of our name, so make sure you're letting them know that each morning you stay with me, we have made to order breakfast, or maybe you do buffet style, or however you do your breakfast. But make sure you communicate that with the guests, so again, you're setting those proper expectations, so they'll know what to expect when they come stay with you. Get the information, if you can, from every person that calls you, inquiring about a reservation. They may not book right now, but they could book future. So if you're getting their contact information and adding them to your mail, it's a great way to stay in contact with them in the future. And even if they're not coming back to your area, maybe they've got a friend that lives there locally, or a friend who is going to your area, and say, I didn't ever stay with this property, but I do get their monthly or quarterly newsletter, and it sounds like such a great place. Maybe you ought to check this out. And so you just never know what could come of it. So it always makes a lot of sense to try and get those email addresses for future communication. Observations are huge. Nobody, kind of back to the whole, telephone reservation that we're talking about. Nobody wants to get up in the middle of the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, to take a reservation. Maybe there's an overseas caller calling and not kind of paying attention to the fact that it's the middle of the night for you, and you're there sleeping. Well, in your voicemail, make sure you mention again that, hey, you can book your reservation right on our website. We've got all of our availability, our best rates, all of our packages. You can book it all right there at www.dodropin. And again, make sure you spell it out. If it's a complicated name, don't expect that travelers are going to know how to spell the name of your property if it is complicated. But observations are a great backup for when you're not able to take the reservation over the phone. And even on our surveys, we know that I think it's something like over 80% of our travelers prefer the option of booking online. So you should certainly be offering online reservations, because if you're not, you're missing out on the potential there too. Certainly some people are going to call you and want to book with you that way, but definitely have the online reservations as a backup, and you'll probably find that ultimately you'll end up getting more reservations online versus over the phone anyways, which simply frees up more of your time to take care of your guests and take care of your property. So, make sure your voicemail is prompt, that it picks up after 4 rings, that it mentions your property by name, that you're smiling when you're leaving your voicemail, and that you sound enthused, and that you're friendly and inviting and warm, and that you basically just want to be conveying above all else that you're here for them and you want them to come stay with you. Make sure you call return voicemails within 24 hours, and I would say the longer that goes, the less likely you are to get that booking. So the sooner you can call folks back, the better. If someone makes a call and leaves you a voicemail, and it's still sitting there at their computer and kind of browsing around, it's very, very, very possible that they just kind of go look at another nearby property, and this place looks nice. Maybe I'll call them and see if I can book with them. So the sooner you can call people back, the better. Not that that's any earth-shattering news there, but definitely try and call folks back. I know you get busy, but again, this is your paycheck calling. So if you can, call that traveler back, as promptly as you can, and then above all, be closing. Know that when you are talking with the traveler, that you are trying to get them to book a stay at your property, and don't be aggressive about it, but try and always keep the conversation on point and steer it towards the point of securing that booking. And then it's not on the list here, but again, don't be afraid to ask for the business, and make sure you are asking for the business. When you get to kind of that point of conversation where you feel it's the right time, and you've extended all your value and everything that you offer here, well, don't be afraid to say, all right, well, we've got the availability in our blue room for the dates that you're talking about here. We'd love to have you stay with us. How about we go ahead and get this one on the books for you, or whatever you are most comfortable with in terms of securing the reservation. But make sure you ask for the business. It's a tough thing. Not a lot of people are very comfortable with it, but you have to. You owe it to yourself. It is your paycheck that's calling you. So you'll find that for all you folks who maybe aren't asking for the business, when you start doing it, I think you might see a little uptick in reservations because you're actually asking for the business. All right. So if you do have any questions here, I want to see if I can see any chat questions here. I'm not seeing any, but that's not to say that there haven't been any. This interface here is a little funky. So if by chance you do have a question and I'm not seeing it here in this little interface here for WebEx, again, please feel free to call me. You can call me directly at 512-322-2712. My email address is twilson, WILSON, at BedandBreakfast.com, and Bed and Breakfast is all spelled out. So any questions you have, I'm very happy to help you. We love working with all you guys, and again, we appreciate you attending our webinar here today. So